experience. I don't know.
Yeah. We also did a little hike, and it was really great to be out I feel like when you're vacationing, you get stuck in like houses and hotels, and it was nice to be out and to hear the birds and the water and all that. That was really nice.
Very cool. All right, we're streaming live on YouTube, and we are rocking. Wow, I'm really jealous of you guys getting to meet Peter and April. I talk to April every week and have never seen her face to face. It's crazy.
Hey, Paul, I don't know if it's a funny filter, but you have like a blur right across your eyes. I don't know if everybody else is seeing that or if I'm crazy. But
it might be my glasses and the way the light hits.
No, sorry, Paul Swearengin.
Oh, okay. Whoops.
Dankowski, you look great. Paul Swearengin has like this blur right on top of his glasses.
I wonder if it's just if I wipe off my camera. Does that help?
Not particularly. It's probably just the white balance is off or something. I don't know.
It does look like a fingerprint or something. More on the top part, maybe a little bit better.
Yeah.
Well, this is not started as my best technical day today.
That actually is better now.
Yeah. It is better.
That's doing better.
All right.
We're all real people, right?
Yeah.
It's all real.
It was just a camera smudge, I guess.
Nothing
Well, good to see everybody today. I'm looking to see who all we have here. Very cool. Anybody else have anything interesting worth sharing happened this week?
Mark and I got to drive up into the mountains to enjoy some cooler weather. And it was both refreshing, and if anyone who happens to be on my Facebook knows, it was also sad to see some of the devastation. So we went up to Shaver, local folks in Huntington, and where the creek fire had come right down to 168, and just, we decided some of it looked like the desolation of Smaug. So for you Lord of the Rings fans, but still the beauty is there. But we're seeing the toll in the mountains up there on between fire and drought. And it was a little sad, as Mark and I both grew up here, and the mountains were have always been a favorite place. So anyway, it was wonderful to be out and enjoy the beauty of nature, and a little sobering.
Now we have fires going on up by Yosemite, and some very famous old trees are in danger. And so, yeah. But we know that it's not climate change. It's not climate change. So God knows we can't do anything about that. Well, I'm glad to be with you guys today. And I always think this is a good place for us to process. So for some of us who have come from a church lineage that includes ties to Bethel Church in Reading, may or may not know that one of the co-leaders of that church, Benny Johnson, passed away this week of cancer, and she'd been battling cancer for a number of years. And this death is always sad, because it leaves people without their friends, their mom, their mate, and that's always a grief and pain for human beings, and we always grieve with that. But the death was one that caused a little bit of conflict in me, because for one, Benny was one of the people that really caused me to say, I just can't be a part of this lineage of the church anymore, because she had become so angry and vile in her speaking out in support of her ideology that there was no fruit of the Spirit in it that I could see. And then also, if we're in that lineage, we were taught strongly about prayers of faith and prayer for healing. And so for Benny, there had been long nights of prayer and hundreds of thousands of people. If you look on social media, they were saying we're praying and believing and declaring that she would be completely healed and, you know, would live many more years. And that sadly did not occur. So I wanted us to process a little bit together today. How do we handle things like these? Again, that sort of wrestling match with loving people, but struggling with maybe some of their ideologies and their thoughts. And what do we do with prayer in this season? And I want to throw out some verses that I always have studied around prayer. And I want to be really sensitive and cognizant that this is an issue that can be difficult for people and disagreeable. And so we can have different views on this. And it's one that I'm wrestling with. And also for some, it may be particularly difficult if you have lost a loved one somewhere along the line. And so I just want to be really sensitive to all of that and give space for that prayer. And I lost my Bible verses. Oh, shoot. Hang on one second. Like I said, guys, it is not my best technical day. All right. So now let me share my screen. Now I got it. Okay. So this is Luke 8. And this is a story about where Jesus and the disciples are in a boat and the weather comes up and they get scared and they're like, Jesus, what are you doing? And in Luke 8, it says, Jesus, after he had said, peace, be still, and the wind had stopped blowing, Jesus said to them, where is your faith? And they were afraid and they marveled and said to one another, who then is this that he commands even winds and water and they obey him? And so we have this story of Jesus saying, why didn't you have faith yourself to be able to say wind stop blowing, and it stopped blowing? And this word right here interests me. It's the word marveled. And if we look into our interlinear Bible here and look at this definition, this is a word, marveled is this word talmazo. And it's an interesting word because if we look at other places where we find it in the Bible, it has an interesting history. And so they were amazed, they marveled that Jesus could tell the wind to stop. So here we have a story in Matthew 8, which is a story about a healing. And it's a Roman centurion that comes to Jesus and says, you don't even have to come lay hands on my servant to be healed. We just know what authority is, and you speak a word and he'll be healed. And it says, when Jesus heard this, he marveled. So as the disciples marveled at Jesus being able to tell the wind to stop, Jesus marveled at the faith of the centurion and said, wow, this is faith beyond anything. So he was as amazed at the faith of the centurion, according to the Bible, as the disciples were that Jesus could tell the wind to stop blowing. And so now if I come down and look at this word, this is how we do sort of cross-referencing study of words and such in the Bible. Where did my word talmazo go? There it is. So if we look at it again, another place where we see this word is, let's see if I can find it now. Yeah, I'm going to quit playing this and just come back here and say another place we would find it is the story where Jesus first kind of reveals himself in ministry in his hometown of Nazareth. And people are like, wow, what this guy's talking about is incredible. And it says in the passage that Jesus could not do miracles in his hometown because they were like, wait, this is Jesus. We went to elementary school with this guy and we played Little League Baseball. Who is this guy to do miracles? So he couldn't do miracles there. And it says, Jesus marveled at their lack of faith. and that he was stunned at how little they had faith there. And ultimately, then if we come to James, where it says, hey, if any of you is sick, call the elders, let them come pray for you, and the prayer of the righteous will resolve their illness, and if they have sins, they will be forgiven. So thinking of all of this together, how the Bible talks about faith, how we should look at being able to pray for one another and have healing and sins forgiven. But we all know we've had moments when we've prayed for something and it didn't happen. How are you handling all of these concepts as you're working in your life today? And I'll tell you one example of something that happened in my life this week. There was in our circle a car accident. Somebody had a very bad car accident, but they walked away unscathed. And so, somebody immediately says, well, praise God, God preserved your life. Isn't that amazing? And I'm at a place in my life where I'm like, why didn't God just not allow the accident to occur? He could have not only saved the life, but saved the car and the car damage and the fear and the trauma as well. Or, you'll hear about there will be a bus accident and, with 15 people on the bus and 14 die and one is preserved. And people will say, well, God had a purpose for your life to be preserved. And it's always been a struggle for me. Like, so God didn't have a purpose for the other 14 people. So faith is a wrestling match. Prayer, great comfort, all these things is a wrestling match for me these days. But I still am convinced, it seems, that we have some interaction with something greater than ourselves at times. Do we have ability to bring, like some of my friends would say, you call out what you need to the universe and you have this law of attraction that draws to you things. So let me open it up to you guys. And again, know that many of us will be in a different place on this. It's a sensitive issue for some of us that may have lost loved ones. So just be very sensitive to that case. But how do you see prayer in this season? How do you see healing in this season? And what does that all look like for you? You can raise your hand in the Zoom room, or if there's silence, you can just unmute and jump in. I would love to hear your thoughts and how you're handling all of this today.
So I'll ask the question I just put into the chat, into the room here. So I pulled up James 5:15 that you were referencing, Paul, about the person will be healed, and was curious after all of our conversations about the word sozo, and sure enough, it's that same sozo word. It seems like, from what I can see on Bible Hub, which is interesting because I've always heard that translate as healed, and thereby presumed to mean that they will be physically healed here on earth, temporarily now, right? As opposed to, oh, this person is sick, they're going to receive all of this prayer, which will have perhaps one of numerous different positive benefits. And maybe the point isn't so temporal. I'm curious anybody's thoughts on that. Literally, that was just like running through my brain just now, and I pulled it up. So,
Marcie Ann, I see your hand up. What are your thoughts?
That was just perfect that you said that, because I was thinking about 10 years ago, however you want to say it, I'll say manifest a chronic illness. And over the years, I mean, and this isn't even cliche, I've suffered a lot physically, but I realized 10 years later that it was so much bigger than that, than just becoming sick. And people would tell me, the thing like you don't have faith, or it's an illusion, or all these crazy things, and makes me question my sanity. But I mean, this illness literally saved me from some horrible things that it slowed me down. It stopped me in my tracks. And I could have literally gone over the edge had this not happened. And so I now see it. And also, because it was a chronic illness, my life, I had manifested because I was living in this horribly abusive, stressful life with no boundaries. And I had so much internal work that needed, and it started this landslide of what seemed to be horrible things. But now in hindsight, I'm just like, wow, I'm still sick. I deal with it. And I'm still trying to let go of the things that made me sick in the first place, and heal the things that made me make the choices that, put me in a circumstance where I got sick. But sozo is such a huge word. It is, what you told us, it's body, mind, and spirit healing. So it's not even cliche. I am humbled that this illness came upon me when it did. It literally saved me. So it's all how we see things,
Yeah, it's interesting. I pulled this up now again too, Lauren, and this passage in James 5 talks about, is any among you sick? Call the elders of the church, prayer of the faith. So a couple of things I would point out is the section right before it, and we can't take these things out of context, has a subheading on it of patience in suffering. So there is a place for suffering and a place for learning how to do suffering well. And as I learn in therapy, like there is a kind of a difference between pain and suffering. We can walk into pain and we can learn to walk through it. But also there's this idea of praying for the sick and being sozoed, which is exactly right, body, mind, and soul. And part of the equation is down here in 5:16 of confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be sozoed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. And so it always makes me wonder too, is there a part of this process of and there is a mental health aspect to this, of confessing our sins one to another. I'm struggling with this. I need help with this. And the prayer for one another can be calling for a manifestation that is supernatural, and also an encouragement of, I am in this with you. It makes me think of a young person who is choosing and recognizing their sexuality may be different than what was presented to them at birth. And as they begin to wrestle with this, that young person is twice as likely to ideate and or attempt suicide as their cis heterosexual counterparts. But if there is one affirming voice in their circle, in their household, their oikos, that number drops by almost half. They become half as likely to attempt suicide. And so is there a part of this process of prayer for one another in when we come and sit and come alongside as the Paraclete, the Holy Spirit for one another, that we start to release healing that also is an emotional healing as well as spiritual? I don't know. What do you guys think? I would love to hear more. How do you see prayer and healing and all of those things in this season? Could it be that some of the miracles we see in the Bible were dealing with more mental health issues or issues that we understand differently today than what they would have called demonic in the Bible, perhaps? Brenda.
Just interestingly, I had a conversation with my daughter yesterday. She's autistic and deals with some of the depression and self-regulation issues that often go with that, anxiety, these kinds of things. And she has found a group of people online where they also deal with some of these same issues from various neurodiverse circumstances. And she said, it's not so much that I get a lot of like advice on how to deal with something. It's more of, I look and go, oh, you too. And I now feel better about my circumstances and I'm not alone. And I think maybe one of the most important healing things in a human life is to make sure you are connected and understand yourself in a larger community, regardless of your actual health. I mean, why do we keep joining together other than, oh, you too? You know, we've learned that some of the struggles we have, others share, and it feels far less alone.
Yeah.
We need community, and you know, that's when you say love your neighbor as yourself. It really means bring other people into your community, be part of each other's lives. Don't just feel nicely toward them. It's an action word. I was, you know, anyway, and it connects back to Lauren, that thing you posted this morning, that, or whenever it is that I saw this morning, I'll put it that way, about our songs that don't talk about the needs of others. We don't use our music and our worship to intercede in the same way, where it's like, these people have need. God, we need your help. It's less about me and more about bringing the community, the love together to address the pain that other people deal with, and to sit with it, and to acknowledge it, and to be alongside people is probably as healing as anything.
That's good. Yeah, thank you, Brenda. Yeah, I'm in a therapy group every week, and we sit in a circle and say, here's my crap today. And there's amazing healing in being very transparent to our pain and sharing it with one another. It's an amazing thing. So I'd love to hear from more of you. And I just kind of put in the chat, challenging some of you who maybe don't talk too often, and you think, well, what do I have to offer to a theological conversation? And I just want to say, you have you to offer to the conversation. Your experience is valid. We want to hear what you're walking through, what you're feeling. This is really less of me or anybody else bringing a theological construct, as we want to wrestle with these things together. So even if you're like, well, I kind of feel like this, that's a very valid and would be valued part of this conversation. So maybe you've never felt comfortable to speak out and share. I'd love to encourage you to jump in and share something. Go ahead, James.
This topic is kind of all over the place, so I'm not really sure exactly what we're supposed to be talking about, but a lot of this just boils down to the complexity of trying to understand God's sovereignty. Why does God allow some things to happen? Why does he intervene in some situations and not in others? And it seems like every sect of the church kind of comes up with their own formula to try to explain what can't be explained. I mean, most of my walk as a Christian was within the evangelical world, and specifically within the dispensationalist portion of it, which would say that the miraculous things have passed away. Which was ironic, because these are the same people who would say, God said it, I believe it, kind of a thing. And yet Jesus clearly said, greater things will you do. But because they don't see it, they automatically assume those things have passed away. So they try to explain it by saying, okay, God's sovereignty is he's no longer interested in that kind of healing because we don't see it. So clearly there must be an explanation for it. And then on the other extreme, I've spent a fair amount of time within charismatic groups that seem to think that it's always God's will or God's design to do things miraculously. And I think that I think that a lot of it just boils down to two different issues. One that we really don't know the mind of God, and we don't recognize that we don't know the mind of God well enough. I mean, there's we attribute things to God's hand that really are not. I think God does allow things in the world that are just random. I mean, that's part of the nature of the university design is randomness. I think that when we're looking at this issue, the main thing to look at is how does God want us to be praying? How does God want us to interact with people who are in pain? I mean, I think of a specific situation for me when I was in college before some of you were born. I was in a charismatic group in our school because it was the only group that was vital in its faith really at all. And there was a young lady there, and I might have told the story to a few of you before, but there was a young lady in our group who was pretty short. She was like 4'11" or 5 feet tall. And there was no dwarfism or anything like that. She was just short and perfectly beautiful and healthy individual, but she felt uncomfortable. Right. And some of the charismatic people in the group said, okay, well, God is going to heal you. Not that there was anything broken in her. God is going to heal you. And they said, okay, we believe this, that God is going to do it. And they prayed for her and prayed for her. And every night she'd mark a measure on her wall, how tall she was and how much she'd grown. And it destroyed her because it wasn't God's will in the first place. And that kind of a thing, I think, is really either extreme becomes dangerous because it tends to know the mind of God when we don't spend enough time ourselves recognizing how little we understand him and how much we walk in the world without any connection to God, and then also how much we walk without a connection with each other.
So James, can I ask you a question on that? So you believe God is a being who is over the universe. So how do you handle with knowing and believing in that God has to allow then an omnipotent God? I don't think there can be anything random if God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. How can anything be random with that God? So how do you deal personally with God allowing negative things to happen in your life or in your sphere?
Well, the randomness is part of his plan. I mean, certainly I believe that God is powerful enough to be able to control every minutia of, if I throw a ball in the air, he can determine it's going to turn right every time, or, he can certainly do that, but that's not what he plans. It's not part of his, it's not part of his, the way things are. I can't say why he does it. I mean, they're the easy answers that, that this is all somehow to strengthen us or something. And I don't have a clue as to why. All I'd lean on is I understand what God's character and what his nature is, that he is fully loving, and that his desire is to heal and to help us to grow. And that he also gives us a lot of freedom. I mean, you do that with your children. With children you've got, you could lock your children in the room and say, well, I'm not going to allow you to go out and hang out with people who are going to be a bad influence. But you don't do that. You allow them to make some of their own choices. I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, Paul.
It's a good answer. I understand where you're if I could stop my children from being harmed, I would. That's where I struggle with this idea of that God, is if I knew my child was going to be in a car accident, I would stop the car accident from happening. Yeah. And that's where I struggle with the idea of that God. But let Lauren and Charity have their hand raised. Jump in there, guys.
It's me.
Yeah, sure.
I was just with all of this, with the Benny and everything, was reminding me of the loneliness of when somebody says you don't have enough faith, and so that's why God didn't heal you. I had grandparents that my grandma, they were adopted grandparents because we moved around a lot, but she was dealing with cancer as well. And my grandpa, we went out to visit him after she had passed, and he's like, yeah, she just didn't have enough faith. And so this was just what happened. And we prayed together a lot, but she just didn't have the faith. And I'm just thinking like how lonely she must have felt in that moment, because he had this theology of healing that if you had enough faith, you'd be healed, and how lonely that must have felt for her. Like I felt like horrible about it, even though I know that's the way he was raised, that's the way he was taught. And how lonely and isolating that must feel for people who have who the church is saying you just don't have enough faith, and they have so much faith and are doing all the right things according to the Bible and are still not getting healed. And that's, I guess, what I'm really struggling with in this season of like, okay, I don't think that it's a faith issue. Maybe it's just a science issue. Like maybe we just haven't come across some of these cures that God or whomever have placed in the world, and we haven't found them yet. And part of God being bigger than everything and being omnipresent, all powerful is, hey, I've provided these solutions for you, and find them. And there's amazing people who are finding all these cures, and it's great. And maybe that is how God is working through this. And it's not just about faith, it's about cooperation and community and finding these things. And we should stop telling people they don't have enough faith, because even in the Bible, it talks about only God knows your heart. So how are we to judge these people? We can't judge them on their sin. We can't judge them on their faith. We can't judge their relationship with God because we don't fully know them. And so we should just stop telling people that they don't have enough of anything, because that's not our place. So that's what I'm struggling with. Like I've had several people in my family have had that told to them. And like some of these, my sister is amazing, and she's made like a 360-degree turn from where she was. And she still doesn't have the healing that she was prayed for on stage at a revival thing. And it manifested for, I don't know, a couple months. And then she was back to where she was. And it was all about, oh, well, maybe you didn't have faith for that. But I mean, she's one of the strongest women I know. And anyways, that's what I'm dealing with. So you guys can, I guess, discuss or whatever.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that struggle. And I think that's important. And I really do believe telling somebody your loved one didn't get healed because you didn't have enough faith is incredibly cruel and traumatic. And I will never come into agreement with that. And another thing, throw in the hopper, and I see the hands up, I'll jump to you guys. Do you guys believe, I think James well said in some way that like sometimes we can say, well, we didn't get healed, so let's throw out any idea of anything supernatural or divine that happens. And then the other end is like, well, it should always be happening no matter what. And so I'm interested to hear people, where are you spiritually? Do you think there are things we can call from heaven, from the universe, from the spirit world for ourselves? How are you handling all of that? So Paul, I see your hand up, and what's on your mind?
Well, I certainly don't have the answer to all this, but this kind of thing always takes me to Job, the book of Job. Namely, there's part of it that's just beyond us. It's interesting the way, as we know, Job had his life completely upended, and things really went south, right? And we as the readers get to see behind the curtain, that it's God and Satan, and God is making a bet with Satan practically. And somehow we were put in the place of accepting that God allowed this terrible stuff to happen to Job. And yet at the end of the day, after all the arguing, all of his his friends telling him, oh, it must be, you must have done something. You must have some sin you haven't confessed. You must have something's wrong with you. And yet at the end of the day, God kind of comes in, makes a pronouncement. Oh, you guys are all these useless words, all the arguments. And yet he pronounces that Job had the better perspective because Job kept clinging to him, not understanding the whole picture, but yet still clinging to him. And somehow at the end, what's always amazing to me is that Job is satisfied. Seems like he's satisfied, even though he didn't get his answer. He didn't get, why did all this happen to me? He didn't get the answer. And yet meeting God was enough to, like having this, I don't know, direct encounter with God was enough. And at the end of the day, even though he had his things restored, more kids and more stuff, but I don't think that's what was satisfying to him. I think it was hearing or just encountering God in a much more close way. I don't know. I just, at the end of the day, I just have to say we don't have the whole picture. And maybe it's somewhat echoing what James was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing your perspective. Jan has her hand up in the Zoom room.
I went through, I'm a 22-year cancer overcomer, say. And I had an 18-month-old at the time, and I was diagnosed with it ended up being stage 3B, which is almost terminal breast cancer. And I was listening to the radio one day and heard Jesse Duplantis say something about, if you have enough faith, you won't get sick. And I've never been sick a day in my life, and it infuriated me. And and there's, people that would say, well, it was because you were in so much sin before you got saved that your lifestyle caused this. And honestly, I have no breast cancer in my family. I had, but, I really, at the end of the day, it did end up actually about 6 months later, Jesse Duplantis got really sick. And I think about these big pastors that have stood up and judged and pointed their fingers and have just fallen flat on their face. And I find no joy in that. Please don't misunderstand me, but I understand that that's not what we're supposed to do. I read a little book by a man called Paul Bilheimer, and it was called Don't Waste Your Sorrows. And it kind of flipped the script that, how can we serve a suffering Savior and think that we're going to go through this life and have no pain and suffering? Because I was a part of that evangelical. I ministered in the healing rooms, and I just, I want to believe, like for me, I just said, okay, God, here's this test coming up. I'm going to ask for this result. I very rarely ever got that result. But I was like, okay, this next test then, and I just kept asking, and I ended up going through like 2 years of treatment and had a stem cell transplant. Real controversial. I happened to be at MD Anderson in Houston, one of the premier cancer hospitals. So I will be always eternally indebted to science and this medicine that they provided for me and this treatment, because 22 years later, I'm here. And I think, I don't say I have all the answers, but I do think that the sorrow that we go through, the trials that we go through, it's not about God, and it says, I'm not going to, I'll be with you through the flood, with you through the fire, with you through the storm, with you through the desert, with you through the wilderness. Not I'm going to pick you up and take you out of it. I think that in those hard places is where we grow. We can choose to waste our sorrow. We can choose to,
Yeah.
Wasted, not grow from it. But I do believe that in great love and great suffering, there's transformation. That's Richard Rohr, my favorite,
Thanks,
And so,
Jen.
yeah.
Beautiful. Bob.
This has always been an interesting conversation to me. Can you all hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. And I think at the end of the day, for me personally, this comes down to, who do I believe God to be? Do I believe him to be good, or do I believe him to be nefarious? If I believe him to be good, then I should expect good things. I understand we live in a reality where just the opposite is true. But at a certain point in time for me, and again, I'm only speaking about my journey here, guys. I fell in love with the mystery. I fell in love with the not knowing. And when I put my head on my pillow, whereas some people, it drives them crazy not knowing and it keeps them up at night, I smile at the mystery and say, I'm so glad that I serve a God who is bigger than me. And on this particular discussion, it's interesting because, guys, I'm facing some stuff right now. This has been a week. I got diagnosis after diagnosis, and it's not good. But at the same time, when I sit with people who begin to be crazy towards, where's your faith, and God has to heal every time, and on and on and on. I always come back to Lazarus and say, do you have an address for Lazarus? Seriously, do you know where he lives? Because he was the recipient of one of the greatest miracles in the Bible, dead for days, and then raised back up. So surely he must still be alive, right? Well, he's not. He still died. We live on a fallen planet. And I live with limited understanding. I really do. But guys, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with not having to know, not getting to know everything. There have been times I've prayed for people and seen miracles. There was a time somebody came back from the dead. I mean, there are times I've walked up to people and I already know their names and things about them. God is real. This is real stuff, but it doesn't happen every time. It just doesn't. And I fall in love with the mystery. I kind of like that it's like this. And I like several people. Brenda, you said some stuff about, perhaps the suffering is with intent. It's on purpose. And I get that. So to me, the right question to ask here is, what is the real nature of God? Because that's what we're really asking, isn't it? Nod your heads if you understand what I'm saying. That's the question. That's the real question. So let's have
I
that.
nod that it's a good question. I'm not sure it's the only question I'm asking, but I nod that it's a good question.
Yeah, I think it's at the core of it. Because when we say, like, of course, a good dad is going to keep his child from, getting in an accident if they can prevent it. But then, I had a daughter who was molested for 2 years when she was between the ages of 6 and 8. It derailed her life. If I could have stopped that, I would have. But it doesn't mean I don't love my daughter. It does not mean that I don't love my daughter. And I am not at this place where I can then say, God, why are you so, fill in the blank? Because he's not. I'm telling you, he's not, guys. And so, hearing Jan, hearing the struggle you've had for 22 years, I get it. These roads happen, and here they come. And I don't have all the answers. I don't have them, and I'm okay with that.
Awesome, Bob. Thanks for sharing. Wendell, we'll take yours and then we'll go to communion.
So maybe an extension of what Bob is saying is he might say, I'll take a wild swing at it, that he likes the God he sees. Not only does he love the mystery, but he likes the guy. And I think that what could be missing in this conversation is, have we asked ourselves how God feels about it? How God feels about all the prayers that are asked of him, all the requests, the petitions, the demands, all of that. And I say that because in friendship, a healthy friendship, has reciprocation. And I think Paul is trying to nudge at it with the Galatians, right? Where he says, hey guys, you're confused and you're mocking God. This is in chapter 6, verse 7. And he's going to say right after that, you're going to reap what you've sown. So something was really out of sorts with those guys. And, I think it's hard to be in a friendship where everything is mysterious and everything is unpredictable. And I don't think God wants to be seen that way. I think there's a lot on his shoulders in the fallen world that we chose, and he's trying to put it back together, but it's taking a very long time. His methods of righting wrong, winning us back to trust, involve, things outside of our dimension and inside of our dimension. So, I think it's important to understand when you look at Job or look at Lazarus or Jonah even, look at Moses, what's going on here in the relationship with God? How does God feel about their trouble and being asked to do the work to get them out of their trouble?
That's good. Thank you guys for sharing. And I want to be cognizant, and not everybody has shared, a lot of us have long histories in the church and in sort of Western Christianity. And I do want to give space for people who may struggle to see God as a male being sitting on a throne, divvying out choices and decisions. I'm really am in a place in my life where I see God as something different than a being sitting on a chair. I think that was an ancient Bedouin sort of look at God, and I think God may be something more spiritual. And the Bible tells us God self-identifies as I am that I am, and I will be that I will be. And just to be really personal about it, I do find it difficult in this season, knowing the trauma of my life, of saying there was a being on a throne in heaven who could have stopped that, but chose not to, for his glory and for a good purpose. And that is, just to be really honest, a struggle of this season for me. And I see a space where God being something more of a collection of us, where we are in interaction with our eternal selves and ourselves here, and in essence takes away this idea of there is a God that could have stopped that trauma from happening to me, but chose to not. And I will just have to depend on someday knowing why there was a good reason for God to make that decision. So I just want to throw that out there to give people space to see God differently in that. And just to know, I'm kind of with Charity. I'm like, I don't have real good answers, but I know I'm giving myself space to search out a God that is different than that one, because that is very difficult for me to see in this season. And I'm totally willing to admit my personal experience has to do with that. But it's a question I keep asking people. It's like, okay, so your God, as you see God, allowed that to happen to me for a good purpose, and even the tougher one for me is for his glory, so we would worship him well. I do struggle with that answer. And I think it's a hard answer for us to give the world outside of Christendom. And so I just give space for us to see God a little differently in this, and to know we get to wrestle with those concepts together. So I just wanted to make sure that was in the hopper as well as we go to communion. Because the Bible does say God is a mystery. And I do believe the writers of the Bible would have described God in the only authority system they would ever have known. And that was a patriarchal father over a household, or a king on a throne. And I think we can see God being something a little bit different than that in this season, because we know authority can look differently than that. And I hope that's okay for me to share that out. But that's kind of what we're doing here, is taking these things to a personal level and wrestling them through. So let's just sense ourselves being connected today spiritually through these discussions, and this hope of knowing the spiritual world better. I was on a podcast with some atheists a while back, and they were asking, like, well, if you're starting to change your beliefs on some of these things that you grew up with, why believe in Jesus at all? And my answer was, because the story is amazing and I have felt its impact on my life, and I can't just ignore that and deny it now. I know there is something inward and outward supernatural that I get to interact with, and I'm not going to give that up just because of my questions. And that's always a little bit of what I think about as I come to communion, is the spirituality of connecting with this goodness of heaven, this goodness of the universe, and connecting with each of you. So as we get ready to take our implements, and I have a Cheez-It today for my bread, my spirit is just grateful for being able to connect with the goodness of heaven and with all of you. And so let's just rejoice in this moment of being one body together, walking with each other in our struggles and our joy and our hope together. And we exemplify that by celebrating the story of Jesus, of a hope that transcends the hope of this world, the hope that transcends my ability to make right and good happen, that there is a transcendent goodness over all the universe exemplified in that story. And so we partake of this together today, in that hope, in that joy, and that love. Amen. And in that, as many of you are talking about suffering today, as we paraclete with one another, as we walk alongside, that does draw us together as human beings. As we prepare to take our drink together today, I was talking with somebody recently that was afraid to share the pain of their story because they felt it would make them seem less in my eyes. And I said, oh gosh, no. Knowing your humanness will grow you in my world, will grow my heart for you, will grow my relationship for you. And it is, in fact, our struggles and our questions that draw us closer to each other, and I believe to the Spirit of heaven, to God. That Job in the story wasn't castigated for asking questions. He had relationship with God for asking questions, and at the end of it all said, because I have asked these questions, I had just heard about God, now I know God. it was his questioning, and not just questioning, his accusation of God, that you are not just and fair, that you are in fact an unjust God, that drew him deeper into relationship with that being of heaven. And out of that, we grant ourselves permission to walk this journey messily together, because it draws us together and draws us to heaven. And we drink in that hope and vein and heart today. Amen. Anybody have any thoughts to share out of communion? All right, well, let us go to community time. For anybody interested, I do have at 5 o'clock tonight Pacific, an unconventional conversation we're having that you're welcome to join. It's people can join in the Zoom room discussion who are a part of my subscription community online. But for those of you here in Sunday community, if you want to shoot me a message, I'll get you the link and you can join in. But we're asking the question tonight, am I still a Christian? And am I allowed to ask questions? And I would like to invite you guys to be a part of that conversation. So if before you go to community and you want to join, just send me a message in the chat. Send me your email address and I'll shoot an email to you so you can have the link and join me tonight. So that's Unconventional Conversations tonight at 5 Pacific. And you can be a part of that conversation. So, all right, Lauren and Charity, take us away.
So one other quick thing, well, actually, I'll share this next week. It looks like people are already starting to drop off. So I will open breakout rooms and yeah, have a great week, everyone.
Hey, everyone.